The Shadow Guests by Joan Aiken, 8. Osmond. "I like your friend Molesworth," Eunice said when the father and son had left. "He's got a witty tongue." He's really more my enemy than my friend," Cosmo said absently. He was thinking, and not my only enemy by any means. He felt extremely uneasy. Eunice was troubled too. She said, "Cosmo, I'm wondering if we'd better find somewhere else where you could stay a bit." For a bit. He was horrified. "Go away from here? Oh, no!" "You like it here?" "Yes." His reply was heartfelt. "We do have a problem, though. Professor Molesworth and I were discussing it. You see, please don't take this wrong, but these occurrences, wardrobes and beds going on the rampage, have only begun happening since you came to the mill house." Cosmo was embarrassed. "You mean I'm making them happen?" "Oh, not on purpose, of course," she said quickly. "But things like that do happen sometimes with boys, people of your age." "But in that case, don't you suppose it might happen whenever I want?" Cosmo said, trying to be detached about it, though in fact he found the idea quite foul. It was like having some disgusting disease, fits or something. "Besides, if I left the mill, where would I go?" "Well, for instance, Professor Molesworth said you were welcome to go and stay at their house in Headington." "Oh, no, thank you." The thought of the biting things Molly had said about his stepmother and her children. "Besides, suppose wardrobes started falling about there." "I have an idea they wouldn't. I think these phenomena are brought on by a combination of this place and your presence in it." "Well then," Cosmo said craftily, "don't you think it would be rather a shame not to make a scientific observation of what happens? It seems a good opportunity." Should he tell Eunice about Con and Sim? But he would really prefer to wait until he had his own ideas a bit more sorted out. "Well, yes," she said in a dubious manner. "But not at the cost of some awful accident. After all, we haven't only you to consider. I dare say you'd be able to take anything that came in a spirit of scientific curiosity and detachment." Cosmo wasn't so sure about that. He hadn't felt in the least detached when he was swinging 20 feet up by one hand. "But there's also your father to consider, and old Emma. She's in her 70s. We wouldn't want her bashed by a clock falling on her or anything of the kind." "No, I do see." He was very cast down. "I do see it isn't fair. Perhaps we'd better wait 2 or 3 days and see how it goes." Eunice was obviously swayed quite a bit by his horror at the thought of going away. "We'll do a lot of careful observation. If you try to study poltergeists, they tend to lay off their activities. Only do be careful, will you? Stay away from danger points, and hold on to the banisters when you go downstairs." Cosmo promised to do this, and went away to his own room, which looked remarkably bare now. Bereft of bed and wardrobe, it did seem as if somebody were trying to show him that he was not welcome in the mill house. He very much wished that he, too, had seen the skinny old girl mentioned by Molly. Who could she possibly be? And how dared she try to get him out of the mill house, where he had a perfect right to be? He'd like to give her a sock on the jaw, interfering old witch. Could she be connected with Con or Sim? One of their mothers, perhaps? It would be hard, he supposed, if you knew your son was going to be killed in battle, to see one of the younger brothers who didn't come under the curse. But Sim and Con had not been hostile. Well, Con had been a bit surly at first, but that had worn off as soon as he saw that Cosmo intended to help him. Con and Sim had needed his help, of course. That was the difference. Perhaps this old girl only needed some kind of reassurance. It was hard, though, to reassure somebody you could not see. Strange that Molly had seen her and he had not. A reversal of the situation with Con and Sim, who had been visible to him but not to Eunice, Emma, or Mr. Marvel. What did that mean? The old girl didn't want him to see her? That she was hanging around now, invisible to him? The thought was very disagreeable. He glanced round the room. There was nothing to be seen, and he settled down to write to Meredith. Poor girl. He could really sympathize with her now. The pang he had felt when Eunice suggested his going away brought back her passionate cry. "Only 1 week in my own home!" "Dear Meredith," he wrote, "we have been having rather a peculiar time here. And in case you don't believe me, Mowgli can tell you that some of it really happened, as he and his father were here today and saw 2 of the happenings. How could a perfectly solid piece of timber turn so rotten in the course of a week, less than a week, that it crumbled to powder in one's hand? Perhaps a thing like that could happen in a tropical land where they had termites, but in cool, orderly England, he would have to go over every inch of his lookout platform before he felt safe venturing up there again. And even then, he would not feel safe. In fact, with a sigh, he saw that that was the kind of thing Eunice had in mind when she said, "Stay away from danger points." But in that case, where could he go? Near the horses, across the footbridge, along the riverbank? "I'm not going to be driven out," he said angrily aloud, "so you can put that in your pipe and smoke it." Silence answered his words. He finished the letter to Meredith, opened his diary, and wrote, "Trouble with the wardrobe. Went to Oxford with Eunice. Mowgli and his father to tea. Bid came downstairs." About to close the diary, he paused, noticing that at the end of the week was another full moon. How quickly that moon had shot round from change to change. Perhaps Eunice was right, and time did go at different speeds. During the next 6 days, there were no more upsetting incidents, perhaps because of Cosmo's cautiousness and the extreme watchfulness of Eunice. As she had said, poltergeists are disinclined to perform if they are expected to, and whoever or whatever it was in the mill house that had thrown down the bed and wardrobe either did not want to be studied or had decided to bide its time until the inmates were off their guard. In the meantime, Cosmo tried to keep away from heights and from heavy objects that could conceivably fall on him. He slept at night in Emma's little bedroom with its view over the meadow. This was going to be a great advantage at the end of the week, he reflected. On the night of the full moon, he would then have a grandstand view of the coach and 6 if it passed by. On Friday night, he took his alarm with him and set it for 3 a.m. Then he climbed into Emma's spare bed, which was even more hammocky and saggy than his own, and fell asleep. He dreamed that Mark was holding his head in the wash basin and had the taps full on. The gushing of water woke him, and he realized that it was the buzz of the alarm. He had put it under his pillow so as not to rouse Emma in the next room. Even so, through the thin matchboard partition, he heard her grunt and murmur in her sleep. Old people sleep lightly. Cosmo had not undressed, except for taking off his shoes. He got out of bed, moved the chair over to the window, and curled up on it, watching and waiting. The little yard down below him was quiet and dark, wrapped in shadow, but the long, pale stretch of the water meadow looked like a lagoon, breathing up silvery drifts of mist, and beyond, he could catch a glimpse of the river itself. At the far north-end corner, the black wedge of wood came down like the tip of a nutcracker, where the old road sliced through the curve between hillside and river. And over it all, the high, pale moon sailed, in a sky that seemed scrubbed bare by wind. There were very few stars to be seen. "I wonder if the coach makes a noise," Cosmo thought. The luminous hands of the clock told him that he still had 5 minutes to wait. Supposing the coach arrived on time, that was to say. Were phantom coaches always punctual? And how long do they go running? Forever? And if they cease running, do they stop abruptly, like axed trains, or fade away, every month a little paler until they are quite gone? Or is it not the passing of time that controls their lifespan, but the number of people who see them? Perhaps, thought Cosmo, if nobody sees the coach, then it isn't there, like the tree in the quad. He felt very wide awake. All kinds of ideas were whirling through his head. About the old girl in black. Could she make an appearance both inside and outside the mill house as Con had been able to do? Or did she always stay inside? About Molly. Why had he been able to see her? Would it have something to do with his weak heart? The fact that he was a rather delicate boy, sensitive to all kinds of things besides ordinary sounds and sights, perhaps? "Woo, woo," called the big barn owl, and floated past the window on pale wings that glistened as they caught the moonlight. A fox barked up in the wood, and a pheasant chickered. In the distance, the sound of the weir was like sandpaper continuously rubbing on wood. Suddenly the coach was there. He could see it across the meadow over to his left, traveling along under the black slope of wood, outlined in dim light. It faintly sparkled, like spider webs with dew on them. So did the horses, 3 pairs, spanking along at a silent canter. The whole equipage moved without any sound at all, skimmering around the perimeter of the meadow. Gosh, thought Cosmo, what a sight to see, what an extraordinary sight. He watched with held breath. He could hardly believe in his own luck. To think that this happened month after month, and nobody knew or cared. Nobody looked at it except Emma, if she happened to go up for a digestive tablet. Why, you'd think people from all over the world would be coming to look at a turnout like that. You'd think travel companies would be running nightly tours, and film companies would be trying to film it. He wondered if it would be possible to catch it with a camera. Another time he must try, but probably because of the dark, a special exposure would be needed, and that would be a problem with the coach going so fast. Then something struck him. It's never been known to stop, Emma had said very positively, but now it was slowing down, and at the corner of the wood it came to a total standstill. Cosmo thought he could even see faint puffs of steam from the horse's nostrils. The door of the coach opened and a passenger got out. As soon as the black figure stepped down, the door closed again, the horses tossed their heads, and the coach moved off, almost instantly disappearing round the curve of the wooded hillside. But the passenger who had descended, a black figure in a long cloak, impossible to say whether it was man or woman, began to walk purposefully at a brisk pace along the river bank, and vanished almost at once out of Cosmo's line of vision. Cosmo did not hesitate then for a moment, but he told himself firmly, if I don't go out now, if I don't try to discover where the person is gone, I shall never ever be able to forgive myself. For the rest of my life, I shall know I'm an utter coward. Also, which will be far worse, I'll know that I let a discovery go by that I might have made. He grabbed his torch in one hand, his shoes in the other, and crept down the tiny steep stairs as fast as he dared. Even so, he heard Emma mutter and call out as she turned over in her sleep. He replied with a mild, reassuring noise, slipped softly across her brick-floored kitchen, and out through the back door, which was always kept on the latch, never locked. Now, if he ran fast round the cart shed, he ought still to get a sight of the black-cloaked figure on the riverbank before he or she reached the footbridge, and either crossed it or turned in the other direction toward the house. At this point, Cosmo reached the corner of the cart shed. For one moment of mixed relief and disappointment, he thought that the figure had vanished entirely. Then he saw it, motionless in the middle of the footbridge, looking down at the river. Just like me, thought Cosmo, beginning to lope across the dewy lawn. As though the figure had heard his thoughts, it lifted its head, swung round, and continued on over the bridge to the island. It seemed to be carrying something. By the time Cosmo had reached the bridge, his quarry was out of sight, somewhere on the island. Dared he call out? He was not sure that he dared to do so, because he simply couldn't imagine what kind of an answer might come back. His scalp crept a little. Cold spasms ran through all his fibers. His skin felt icy. Walking gingerly, feeling with each foot before he put it down, he reached the middle of the bridge. Come along, boy, said a cold voice. I am waiting for you. Ahead of him, close to the mill building, Cosmo saw the figure in the black cloak. Now he was certain that it was a man. He could not have said exactly why. The arrogant, thin shape of the head and face, perhaps, or the height and build, though in fact the man was not so very tall. Not as large-framed as Mr. Marvel, but he moved with a swift, springy stride, walking on rapidly toward the mill. When he reached the high tangled growth of nettle and burdock by the entrance, he pulled out a blade and slashed sharply. Right, left, right. The shadowy green stuff toppled away on each side of him like cobwebs. Who are you? Called Cosmo shakily, sometimes frightened. Something frightened him about this character, a kind of suppressed rage visible in his movements. But that kind of fright was a lot easier to bear than the absolute fear of the unknown which filled Cosmo as he crossed the meadow. Even the sharp, rank smell of the cut nettles had something reassuring about it. With great caution, he stepped over the stone threshold into the mill. Who am I? That's none of your business. What does it matter to you who I am? It does matter, Cosmo said obstinately. Who are you? Where have you come from? In that coach? Where have I come from? I don't mind obliging you there. Cosmo thought he heard a short, mirthless laugh. Ha! I've come from Medmenham, if that means anything to you. It meant nothing. Medmenham? The Hellfire Club, you young fool. Why do you suppose I know about you? Why do you suppose I have come here to meet you? Do you know about me? Startled, Cosmo added. What do you know? Oh, I know. More than you reckon. All this time, the other had been moving toward him. All this time, the other had been moving on and away, through the black velvet dark inside the mill, and Cosmo, feeling warily ahead of him, with hands, feet, and a kind of extra sense, had been slowly following. The dark was complete, but now, suddenly, there came a splintering crash of wood, collapsing on stone as something gave way. A great rotting double door had been thrust aside, and a white flood of moonlight poured into the big empty place, revealing high stone walls, a ceiling almost out of sight overhead, a dusty floorboard. Outside the open door, Cosmo could see a section of the huge weed-grown mill wheel. The sound and smell of water was all around him. Cosmo still found it hard to distinguish any features of the cloaked man, who stood with his back to the light from the door. He was visible simply as a black shape with a fuzz of pale hair. He set down his bag, or whatever it was he carried, and dropped his cloak on the floor. Now he appeared to be dressed in dark, close-fitting clothes with a gleam of white at the neck. Who do you know about me? Persisted Cosmo, stepping sideways in the hope of obliging the other to turn his face into the moonlight. When he did so, it was a shock, for his face was familiar, though Cosmo could not have told why or where he had seen it before. Light-colored locks falling over the brow, a long, sharp nose, thin, angry lips, and thin cheeks which seemed to be overspread with blemishes, scars, pockmarks. The eyes were in shadow, nothing could be seen of them, but the general impression was of a younger person than Cosmo had thought at first. 18, 19 perhaps, an ugly, unfriendly, unlikable face. But at least he was a real person, not a monster, as real as Khan, as real as Sim. How do I know about you? Because of what we do at Medmenham. What do you do? Things you wouldn't understand, little boy. Necromancy. Thaumaturgy, divination. We have clever people there, learned people. Their studies go so dark and so deep that they can tell the future, yes, to the last grain of sand that will fall from as the last pyramid crashes away into nothing. Why have you come here? Who are you? Cosmo demanded again. I am Osmond Curtis, boy. Does that name make you tremble? No, why should it? Because I am the last of my kind you will meet. Oh, I know you think you are something remarkable because you met those two stupid children. You aren't so very old yourself, Cosmo said boldly. Old enough to settle your hash, my young gamecock. Come then, if you are so full of spirit, choose a sword. What? Choose a sword, arrogantly, Osmond Curtis pointed to the bag he had brought with him. It was rather like a golf bag, Cosmo saw, which unstrapped proved to contain several swords. It must have been heavy to carry, he thought, almost mechanically selecting an épée with a long, slender, whippy blade like a French handle. On guard! But hey, wait a minute. How do you mean on guard? I've never done this kind of fighting. I haven't learned fencing. Mark and Ma had, however. She had been senior blade in her fencing club at college, and had taught Mark all the feints, lunges, parries, thrusts, counters, and recoveries that she could remember. Mark had taken to it with enthusiasm, and sometimes, for hours together, little Cosmo had sat watching. That is your bad fortune, said Osmond Curtis callously, and lunged forward at Cosmo. A fierce flash of moonlight ran up his blade. You rotten cheat! Almost instinctively, Cosmo knocked his blade aside. I wasn't ready for you. It's not fair. Fair? The bright blade came zipping at him again, and Cosmo, hardly readier than he had been before, managed to deflect it by twisting his wrist, throwing it off to the right. Vaguely, he began to remember the voices of his mother and Mark. That is, caught, the fourth position of the wrist, from the French quatre. This is tierce, the third position. Always oppose your blade with the other hand. Keep yourself in balance on your toes. Mark, keep your weight exactly poised. Ready to move forward or back or to the side, but always under control. This, now, is botte accomplie, beginning at high card, finishing in low tierce. Now let me see you do it forte. That is the upper half of your blade, the stronger part. See? With that, I can knock your point aside every time. Watch your button mark. There, it has fallen off. But there were no buttons on these swords. The point sparkled in the moonlight, bright and deadly. Fair, Osmond replied. There is no question of fair between us two. Why not? Because the Black Priest at Bedmingham looked into the scroll of the future for me, looked ahead to see what fate will bring. Osmond lunged expertly. His blade came within a centimeter of Cosmo's cheek. If Cosmo had not thrown himself, half staggering, with his legs tangled together off to the side. Already his knees were shaking, his arms were aching with the effort of being held up high. I don't understand at all. What Black Priest are you and Ilda's son? Cosmo panted, trying in his turn to make a lunge. Up to now he had been fighting entirely on the defensive. It was as much as he could do to oppose his blade. In one way or another, to all the darting, piercing thrusts that his adversary was delivering, the point of Osmond's sword seemed like a whole nest of hornets, ready to sting at every quarter. Eldest son? I am an only son, Osmond shouted angrily. How do you think my mother would feel if I were to die? I suppose she'd just have to bear it, like all the rest, Cosmo gasped, jumping backward out of reach, and then bounding forward, trying for a flanconade, a thrust at his opponent's side. She is a woman of deep learning, of much lore, not the kind to put up tamely with a bad fate. When I asked the Black Priest if I should die fighting like my forebears, their blades clashed, engaged, then flung apart again. The old fool, I don't believe he knows half that he pretends to. He said my battle would be against a boy younger than myself, a boy from another time. He named you. But I do not intend to die. He said if I escaped you, and you are an unskilled fighter, that I should be the first to break away from the curse, as my clever mother planned. Mother, he said, are you there? Don't worry, my dove. I am close enough, came the answer, in a thin, dry voice like that of a parrot. Cosmo was horribly startled by its closeness, and by the unexpected glimpse of a woman near the big moonlit opening. She was on his right, or sword arm, and seemed to be edging in steadily, creeping toward him. He remembered Molly's description. A skinny old hag in black. She looked the type. To think that locking somebody up and starving him to death would be a real laugh riot. This one was old enough and skinny enough to fit the description, and her expression, what he could see of it, certainly did. Stand farther off. You're likely to get hurt, Cosmo panted at her, but the woman only laughed, edging farther on. Osmond said, You can't hurt her, fool. She will not be hurt by your blade. My mother is a Stygra. She can fly through solid walls. She has taught me much of what I know. He laughed rather crazily. Cosmo could not help being horribly distracted by the presence of the old woman at his elbow, creeping closer and closer. He thought he saw her pick something off the floor, and wondered what it could be. Next moment he realized it was the cloak that Osmond had flung down. Using it, Aiken had used his gladiator's net. She swung it to and fro, trying to trip Cosmo. 2-1 isn't fair, Cosmo shouted angrily, jumping backward from one of Osmond's fierce thrusts. You may as well give up now, stupid boy. You may as well give up now, stupid boy. I can take a man's heart out and leave a sawdust one in its place, the old woman hissed behind his right shoulder. Why don't you then? Cosmo flung back. If you can work all that magic, why not do it? Fair, Osmond said. Only fools expect life to be fair. Pressing forward steadily, he darted his point straight at Cosmo's breastbone. Cosmo could see it coming at him like a diamond, and even in that moment he remembered the needle-shaped females of the flatland, and the author's comment, a female in flatland is a creature by no means to be trifled with. I'm finished, he thought, but at least he remembered a joke. But I'm finished, he thought, but at least I remembered a joke just before I died. Incredibly, though, the darting blade struck something hard under his shirt and glanced off sideways. The old woman let out a harsh cry of rage, and Cosmo seized the chance to leap backward out of danger. But how long could he keep up this unequal fight? He ached and trembled with fatigue. Sweat ran scalding into his eyes. The cold air on his tongue tasted sharp as pewter, and his heart, thudding away savagely inside his ribs, felt like some heavy piece of deck cargo that is liable to break loose from its moorings at any moment and hurtle about the ship, doing untold damage. I'll never win this fight, Cosmo thought coldly, because this man wants to kill me, intends to, and has to kill me, and I don't want to kill him. All I want is for the fight to stop. Perhaps if I were to try and knock him out with my hilt. Snatching a handkerchief from his pocket, he wrapped it round the blade of his weapon, and holding the sword by the blade, flexed his knees, preparing to spring forward and bring down the hilt on Osmond's head. But as he crouched, something black and smothering came down over his head. The cloak, he thought. The old hag has blinded me with the cloak. The impulse of his spring took him forward, and he felt that he was dragging the woman with him. He could hear her breath rasping behind his ear. Then the sound was drowned by another, a rustling, creaking, rumbling noise that rose in volume to a crashing roar, and the boards suddenly fell away from beneath his feet. He felt himself poised in midair, then falling. Solid objects, chunks of masonry or wood, were cascading round him. A shower of fragments battered his head and arms. His head was still wrapped in the black cloth. He could see nothing. Fighting to disengage himself, he gasped as he suddenly plunged into icy, rushing water. No time now, he thought. He kicked and struggled instinctively, but knew that he was going down deeper. He felt that he was being whirled and tumbled over and over, like a marble being bounced down a flight of stairs in a bucket full of suds. He had let go of the sword long ago, and had no notion what had become of Osmond or the horrible old woman. No time or strength to concern himself with them. He was wholly occupied in kicking and battling his way upward, trying to combat the fierce pulling, tugging undertow that was sweeping him onward and down. If he didn't manage to get some breath into his lungs soon, he would die. He felt certain that death was only seconds away. And then, at the last possible moment, silver light bathed his face, and air, sharp and stinging like Eunice's brandy, rushed into his open mouth. He saw the moon overhead, silvery and calm. He was on the surface of the water, being hurled along like a twig in a breakneck smother of white foam. All I have to do now is keep afloat, he thought hopefully. And in the end, the current is bound to slow down and I'll be able to swim to the bank. I just have to keep afloat. But just then, his foot caught on an underwater snag and something heavy struck his head, a crashing blow. The moon vanished from view and he went down again into darkness. And that is the end of chapter 8.